Hello and welcome to the pilot episode of Then and Now, a new series for the channel where I, the comic archivist, take a look through time to compare the very first issue of a property and the latest first issue under that same title. Will this be an interesting look at the evolution of storytelling, or comic books as a whole? Well, let's find out together. Obviously from the title, you can guess what this is going to be on. And do I need to explain what Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is in 2018? The television show originally aired on Fox Kids in 1993, using American actors mixed in with fight scenes from Zyuranger, a Japanese action-oriented superhero show, or Super Sentai. And frankly, I think if you've only ever seen Power Rangers and none of the Sentai, the Japanese shows, then you should at least pick up Zyuranger, though Dairanger is my favorite. Comparing the two shows on a story level itself is kind of hilarious and a real show that Saban had a great idea in making an American adaptation, even if it took forever to get off the ground. The show was a hit almost immediately, and the first people to snatch up the comic license was the popular Hamilton Comics. Everyone knows Hamilton Comics, right? Hamilton Comics was basically a licensed property comic maker, making things like Eek the Cat, Dick Tracy, something called Charles Barkley and the Referee Murders. God, I need to find that for Binging on Comics. And of course, the Power Rangers licensed comics. And this is the first issue we'll be using today, even if I am reading it from the Archive Volume 1, available wherever you want to find it. No one's paying me to plug their thing, so find it where you want it. Hopefully, by the time I make this, I can find a scanned copy of this, or else you'll be seeing pictures from my phone. Ungodly sorry. So Hamilton only had a license for a year, and then it went over to Marvel Comics, who had it for a year, and then it went to Image, who actually got only one issue out before the following year it went to Acclaim and Valiant Comics, who technically put out an anthology comic magazine with other Saban properties, but that too got canned after like 3 issues. There's other stuff like the Jetix magazine, having some Power Ranger comics in it, and Tokyo Pop even put out a photo comic of episodes that it aired. It wasn't until 2012 that any real solo series would come out, with Papercutz taking the mantle for a few years, until 2016, which is when Boom Studios got the rights and has been going heavy ever since. Sure, they'll technically need to hold the title for longer than a couple of years to break the curse, but they've already become a massive hit and had several spin-offs, especially with that Shattered Grid story, so I guess we can say that this stopped being the Red Sox of comics licenses. And it's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers #1 from Boom Studios we'll be covering today as the Now, though I'll be using the Volume 1 of this as well, but I do own the first copy digitally, and I think I have a first issues out on it, so for the 2 people who've been following me since 2016, you may know the answer here. But really, it's about the journey and not the destination, man. So now that we're all caught up on the who's and when's, let's get into comparing the past and the present. The first category for any comparison between comics has to come down to plot. And with these two, they are very different beasts. The first issue of the Hamilton Comics is called The Menace of Dracula, and boy, does that title give you the completely wrong notion of what this issue is going to be about. We begin with Kimberly, Jason, Zach, and Trini all standing around and talking to Billy about his exhibit for the science fair. He's nerding hardcore about his Sinestra Dracula Lepidoptera, his Dracula butterflies, and that gives Lord Zed, who's spying on him, an idea for his next monster, a giant caterpillar. Hey, this actually works out surprisingly well for the baddies on this, since the caterpillar actually sprays some webbing like Mothra larval style, and traps Jason, Trini, and Zach in cocoons. So it's up to Billy and Kimberly to go to the special Zarathustra dimension, since there's a horse-sized spider who spits acid that can break the cocoons. Yeah. They gather the acid, free their friends, and then, oh no! The caterpillar is now a full-fledged Dracula moth, with the infamous laser beams all entomologists fear. The Rangers don't actually stand a chance against this thing, but Zed says screw it and makes his monster grow! Actually, I've always wondered that since he throws his staff, does he just have a ton of those in a back room somewhere? Or does he just go down defeatedly after every battle to pick it up? Like that one kid who always has to go get the soccer ball they just launched into the woods. Anyways, the Rangers get into their Shogun Megazord and kill it. There's also a book ending with Bulk and Skull, which I did skip because it's standard Bulk and Skull bullying fails. Scud though. Now time to see if the new Mighty Morphin can bring the boom. God, did I write that? So yeah, the 2016 Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, ... Bulk and Skull are now YouTubers, and they give us the history of the Power Rangers, which is a fantastic overview from start of Rita's invasion to Earth to her creation of the Green Ranger, and actually being filmed 2 days after the first time the Dragon Zord teamed up with the Megazord, so now there are 6 Rangers. And then we cut to them in school, and shudder gasp, the kids are not perfect! Tommy is still a bit antisocial since he's the Green Ranger, and only recently not mind-controlled for evil. Kimberly is still flirty with him, Zach actually falls asleep in class, and both he and Jason get detention for this. While they're in detention, Billy, who awkwardly looks like Albert Wesker in this, and Trini works on the Dragon Zord diagnostics. But more importantly, we have a focus on Tommy and Kimberly in a training simulation, where we get Tommy making a poor decision that he beats himself up for. And that night, the awkwardly hot Scorpina comes to Tommy in his room, and then the issue ends. Now, I'll be honest here, I don't know who has the better issue here. On one hand, the Menace of Dracula actually really works to bring an episode of the show to the comic format. There's the same beats from the show, setting up the monster of the day, having a reason why it's not going to be a quickie win, and then they win. But, on the other hand, the Boom comics are doing their own thing. Rather than acting like an episode of the show, they're basically making it a comic book with multi-part stories focusing on the characters they want to write that are loosely based off the ones from the show. So the very first score I have to give on the very first Then and Now is a tie! Everyone gets a point because they both have positives and both work very well for what they're going for. The first wants to tap the show while the show was coming out to keep the feel and characters, while the Now is about taking those nostalgic characters and seeing it through new eyes. Hopefully the next category won't lead to a split decision. The second category is the characters, and this is kind of an obvious one. The characters in the Hamilton comics are very, very much like the ones from the show, and while that's good to connect the show lovers, it's not good on a technical level. For you see, the TV show never truly fleshed out these characters to be anything more than basic characters. I always figured this was so that a wider range of kids could identify with these people, and they wouldn't be too edgy for the parents. I mean, it was mid-90s when the "won't someone please think of the children" craze was all the rage, so keeping them somewhat shallow was a boon. But that doesn't mean that they were bad at all, just not deep. But then there's the freedom of the Boom comics. The characters can't be the same cardboard cutout of people that they were in the past. They're relatively now being fleshed out by showcasing that they have a voice and are kids in a contemporary setting, not 25 years ago. And since they're more towards either long-term fans or comic readers, they're allowed to play with them and make them, air quote, realer. Hence the fact that Zach and Jason get detention, because Zach fell asleep in class. But the ultimate drawback when it comes to the depth of these characters is that this is a story about Tommy. And as the back said, it is a Green Ranger Year 1. This is right after he became a good guy, so we're seeing a lot of shakiness on his part, which does give this story a driving force forward, and that means Tommy acts as a lightning rod to bounce the other characters off of. So the answer here is close, but it is actually going to be that change is good, and the much needed modernization of beloved characters can be handled tastefully. Point goes to Boom. Now time for the most subjective category of all, art. Now, I can already hear the rabble-rousing. It's a 90s comic book, so clearly it must be the worst art ever. I know, because a guy in a hat told me that. But you've already seen the artwork, so you know that it's not Image 90s, which was also mid to late 90s. Then the major influence became manga for most artists, especially in the indie scene, but we're not here to talk about evolution of art. I'm going to go with the controversial choice and say that I actually prefer the artwork for the Hamilton comics more. This isn't to say that I dislike the Boom art, far from it. I do legitimately like it, but I think the Hamilton art captures the look and feel of the Rangers much better. Let's just compare these shots of the whole groups together. You can easily tell who's who in both, but you do have Billy looking like Wesker, and just a bit more looseness in the artwork that may add a kinetic feel in action scenes, but it does not necessarily reflect well in static shots like this. Not to mention the classic does have a brighter color palette, which I think would have pumped the Boom comic up for this point. But I do have to give an asterisk for this point because it's clear the colors for the Hamilton one were recolorized, so they may be the original colors used. They're a lot crisper than they would have been, but it doesn't change the overall palette to be brighter, so it still counts. Points for the then. And finally, we're going to look into the future! So what about the follow-up issues? Are these first issues just one-hit wonders? Or are they actually going to be the second album of Oasis, but not the third? Well, starting with the Boom comics because it's a continuous story, Volume 1 is the story of Tommy fighting against his evil half, mostly metaphorically, and just a lot of twists and turns that make it a brilliant read and just fantastic 10 out of 10, especially for the build-up it gives to the Shattered Grid storyline. However, the Hamilton run did something that legit surprised me. While they're not a full epic story spanning these issues, the second focuses on Ernie deciding to pretend to be a monster so he could have them autograph a piece of cocoon from the first issue. There's also a gag with Bulk and Skull trying to take some form of fame or something, with them being the Brontosaurus and Stegosaurus Rangers. It does end with Zed making an evil version of Ernie's costume persona, but ultimately this really highlights a problem I have with the Boom comics and how epic they actually are. There's actually very little fun to be had. It's why I love the Justice League Power Rangers crossover more than the main story being told. It's not about wackiness, which is why the Boom books will take this category, but it is just the fact that they are a very serious read. You do get the child soldier feel going on with these characters, with how serious they are most of the time, and while it does lead to rich storytelling, it can also be a real buzzkill to read. So yes, Boom Studios takes this point, but mainly because sticking close to the show like this, it's just insane to read. So Boom Studios wins this one, but that doesn't mean that Hamilton Comics were the losers at all. These two are so radically different that it's almost unfair to compare them. The Hamilton comics are the perfect examples of the absurd fun that came from the TV show, while the Boom Studios comics uses these characters and basically makes the movie adaptation. Extensions of the characters we know without being as shallow. More relatable maybe, but certainly not as wholesome. So both books are awesome, and I definitely think the archive is worth owning as well as the current ongoing, and every spin-off of that like the Pink-centric book. As always, I'll give some suggestions for other videos to watch. Like Last Angry Geek has a fantastic review of the Boom Power Ranger Pink spin-off book, or the obviously no duh for the history of Power Rangers, as done by that man in the hat I talked about earlier, Linkara. Since I don't have the budget for a fun Power Rangers bookender here, just pretend that I'm in spandex that's way too snug cause I'm a big boy. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you agree that Boom Studios reigned supreme as the quintessential Power Ranger comic? Or that Hamilton held the heart of the show and should have been the winner? While you're down there in the comments, let me know what you'd like to see on the potential next episode of Then and Now. Views definitely depend on if it'll happen again. As always, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please consider supporting our channel on Patreon. But even just a thumbs up, share, and a sub goes a long way to helping us reach that monetization goal again. More than anything else though, I'm the Comic Archivist, and stay golden, Inklings!